Black sail hit with cake by white gala hostess, then she pulled for it bottle and sat shut and down. Crystal chandeliers burned like suns above the Olympian Hotel's grand ballroom, their light slicing through perfume-soaked air. Laughter scattered, then froze, as Cassandra Langley, heiress in a molten gold gown, stepped forward, her smile sharper than glass. A raspberry tart gleamed in her hand, its glaze catching every flicker of light. She didn't speak at first, she just let silence stretch until it trembled. Then, with a voice, smooth as champagne and twice as cruel, she said, "Some people will never belong here." The tart flew, it struck Dr. Amara Kingston across her sapphire shoulder, crimson bleeding down silk, sugar dust clinging like ash. The quartet stopped mid-note. A gasp split the room, phones rose in unison, tiny red dots recording humiliation. Billionaires leaned forward hungry for spectacle, while marble floors reflected every sharp edge of shame. Cassandra's grin widened, triumphant, as if she had crushed an empire with one throw. Amara didn't flinch. She stood beneath chandeliers blazing like judgment, her chin high, her eyes steady, her stillness louder than the laughter. For a heartbeat, the ballroom itself seemed to hold its breath. Outside, cool night air pressed against the glass, waiting. Inside, the world tilted. What came next was no apology, no retreat. It was the first spark of a storm that would swallow every glittering name in that room. And when you hear what Dr. Amara Kingston did in answer to that insult, you'll understand why the night the cake hit her gown became the night an empire fell. Would you like me to now write this hook in 2 alternate variations as well, so you can pick the one that feels most viral and curiosity-driven for your audience?
Marble floors shone like still water beneath the Olympian Hotel's chandeliers, each facet scattering warm light across frescoes, where Greek gods drifted over painted clouds. A string quartet threaded a soft waltz through the hum, polite enough to flatter conversation, firm enough to set its tempo. Each time the terrace doors opened, a breath of cool night slipped in with city scent, and the hush of tires on wet stone, then vanished behind velvet drapes. Servers crossed with crystal trays in steady hands. Laughter skimmed the marble. Phones glowed at table edges while names, favors, and numbers moved in whispers. Billionaires arrived with handlers who knew where to seek power. Aristocrats wore antique jewels like afterthoughts, and nodded as if titles were just long family names. Influencers filmed mirrors, steps, and faces, narrating the night for followers who would never feel this marble, but would judge every choice. Donors compare pens the way others compare shoes. The foundation's banner promised clinics, scholarships, and shelter, while the guest list promised leverage. Smiles operated like gates, some opened, some closed, all measured. Under the music, deals floated like confetti that never landed, brilliant and weightless until someone signed. Everyone understood the choreography. Cassandra Langley owned the center. The blonde heiress wore a gold gown that held light like poured metal, shoulders framed as epaulettes, waist cut to a blade. Her smile granted access with a single glance. Photographers orbited because she made good pictures. Staff shifted course when she altered her path by inches. She greeted with an exact tilt that weighed lineage, liquidity, and momentum before the second syllable. When a venture partner asked about committee seats, Cassandra's grin approved without word. Where she paused, chatter brightened. Where she turned, it cooled. Power liked being near her. She understood that perfectly. Across the room stood Dr. Amara Kingston, sapphire-gowned, quiet present. She thanked staff by name after reading badges and listened fully when people spoke, as if attention itself could change outcomes. She asked the first violin whether his shoulder had survived a long tour. He brightened and said yes. She nudged a centerpiece 2 inches so guests could see one another without leaning. Nothing about her announced power. Everything suggested it. She carried the calm of someone who has signed life-changing checks and still slept. Cameras drifted toward her the way compasses find north, slowly, certainly without argument. Every time the stakes glittered, the board chair whispered about matching pledges if certain families signed before midnight. A shipping magnate promised faster corridors after storms, speaking with clipped vowels and careful optimism. A cosmetics founder described mobile clinics for mothers living 2 bus rides from care. Lawyers compared clauses near a bronze Athena, wary of language that looked generous while hiding strings. The director moved through clusters with a soft voice and sharper memory, repeating the mission while tracking who nodded and who blinked. 7 figures rolled across silent auction screens in cold fonts, precise as steel rulers. Nothing here happened accidentally. Phones hovered like harmless birds and recorded like hawks. Private threads filled with observations dressed as jokes, each ready to hatch into leverage by morning. A donor's assistant typed seating changes that translated into access. A columnist scheduled a story while praising a patron's cufflinks. Even kindness carried calculation because the room trained people to spend wisely. Into that current rolled a glittering cart loaded with desserts arranged like jewelry. Raspberry tarts shone under powdered sugar. Macarons rose in color-coded towers. Chocolate curls pretended to be bronze. Sugar dust floated like tiny stars under crystal light. The room is approved. Cassandra turned with two friends and accepted a plate from a young server. Trying to be invisible, her gaze found Amara and paused, brief enough to deny, clear enough to feel. Bodies registered it before minds caught up. The quartet entered a phrase everyone knew. Conversations thinned to make room for listening. From the balcony, a photographer trapped gold and blue in one frame, torch and tide set side by side. Cassandra approached, smile bright, voice pitched near the microphones. "Brave color," she said. "Let us hope it stays that way." Laughter stirred like water before a dive across the marble. She lifted a tart between manicured fingers, turned slightly for the light, and let the room hold its breath. The throw was clean, almost elegant. Red burst against blue, a flower opening and sliding in wet petals down silk. Seeds dotted skin like punctuation. The quartet stumbled, then recovered. Gasps struck first. Laughter followed, bold now that someone had written the line others could repeat. Phones flashed like slow lightning. Someone whispered, "Who invited?" Someone else answered, then added a rumor that sounded plausible enough to sting. The marble reflected everything, merciless and bright. Cruelty traveled faster than decorum. Amara did not reach for the stain. She breathed once, slow, and let the breath go, as if measuring what remained. The foundation director started forward, then hesitated because eyes were on him, and soon money would be too. A security captain adjusted their stance and stayed still because desserts are not weapons here. Staff looked at one another in tiny mirrors of pity and silence. Powdered sugar speckled Amara's shoulder like frost. She lifted her chin and met Cassandra's eyes without heat, without plea, without apology. Stillness stood where outrage might have raged, and felt stronger. The cameras noticed too. "Consider it festive," Cassandra said, handing the empty plate to the server with a smile that burned after it left her face. Friends around her laughed too loudly to hear themselves. Influencers framed the crimson smear in unforgiving detail, and typed captions that pretended neutrality while selling outrage. Outside the glass, the cool night kept breathing. Inside, crushed berries sweetened the air, and the chandeliers seemed to lean closer. The program resumed because schedules outranked shock in rooms where tickets outpriced rent. The host spoke about hospitals and scholarships with steady grace. People applauded on cue, yet attention orbited the stage. Cassandra offered a reporter a line about community and tradition, saying inclusive, while standing beside the woman she had marked. The camera captured gold, green, red, and blue. The board chair brightened stage lights and raised the mic, but volume cannot change gravity. Amara accepted a folded napkin and set it back without using it. She thanked the server by name. She asked the violinist whether his shoulder was sore after travel. His arm steady. A donor approached with a compliment that sounded like pity. Amara nodded and turned to the stage as the director listed clinics, mentors, beds, and meals. 7-figure numbers climbed across screens while something else shifted quietly beneath. A hedge fund titan whispered, "What exactly does she run?" and frowned at the answer he should have known. A duchess studied the stain like a fresco, revealing prophecy. An athlete offered water, then stepped back when Amara declined. Publicists messaged clients to avoid statements until morning. Posts tilted cruel, bland, or brave. Power took inventory. For now the scene belonged to a smear of red, a dress of blue, a hostess who drew blood with berries, and a woman who refused to bleed. The marble remembered everything. The music returned thinner than before, as if the bow scraped glass instead of string. Conversations restarted in careful pieces. Laughter tried to sound normal, and kept landing sharply. Cassandra stood at the dessert cart with a stage-ready smile. A hostess in a gold gown who knew exactly where every lens pointed. She lifted a pale green macaron, turned it for the cameras, and said in a bright voice, "Color needs company." The throw was a neat arc. The shell grazed Dr. Marikade's sapphire shoulders, spun on the marble, and left a pale smear beside the raspberry stain. Phones rose again. Red lights pricked the air like small insects swarming a lamp. Mara didn't move. She drew one breath and let it go. Powdered sugar drifted through golden light and settled like frost over the mirrored floor. Gods in the fresco watched with painted patience. A server glanced at a supervisor. The answer was a tiny shake of the head. Cassandra chose a pink, sweet, flicked it with bored precision, and watched it strike near the first mark, glide in a bright curve and stop at the tip of Amara's shoe. The room tasted of berries and heat. The crowd recognized its part. A fun partner crossed his arms and smiled for future favors. A duchess hid a smirk behind a fan. Influencers framed cruelty until it looked like style. The chandeliers flickered like a fading empire, their facets blinking as if the ceiling itself were uncertain. At the terrace, the cool night pressed against the glass, steady and indifferent. Taxis hissed along wet streets beyond the windows. The marble sent laughter back brighter than it arrived. Whispers hardened into cues. Who brought her? Which table? New money never learns the map. Cassandra basked in the warmth of attention that cost nothing. She sent a lavender disc spinning. It missed, cracked beneath a chair leg, and split into neat halves. A banker nudged with polished leather. A phone caught the fragments like evidence. To some the image looked playful, to others pitiless, to almost everyone profitable. Maro offered the first violinist a second to retune a string, a small act that steadied his hand. He nodded, grateful and embarrassed. A woman in silver murmured that the stain looked staged, as if a stylist had placed it there for read. From the bar came a line, flat as a verdict. Her place isn't here. Cassandra drifted closer, gold pooling at her feet. You heard them, she said, voice sweet and edged. Space is earned. Another macaron sailed, lemon cracked with a bright scent that cut through perfume. The quartet kept time, yet the melody blurred, sympathy hiding between measures. Laughter bounced, louder with the marble's help. A young donor lowered his phone, then lifted it again when he saw the forest of screens around him. In this room, memory outsourced itself to video. Captions would later say what mouths refused to admit. Maro watched the motion the way a pilot watches the weather. Cassandra fed the algorithm. Record this, she told a lens. We celebrate excellence. She posed a robin's egg blue macaron against Amara's dress, smiled for a shot, and let it fall with a shrug. But excellence is earned. Belonging is earned. The last word landed like a polished stone pressed into an open palm, and called a gift. It lay between them and would not roll away. The terrace doors opened. A ribbon of cold slid through, cooling faces warmed by champagne and spectacle. Candles shivered. A reporter asked the host about tradition. The host praised continuity and access, with practiced balance. Amara's gaze touched a painted Athena, whose calm felt almost human. A socialite tried a pastry joke and laughed too loudly. She checked her reflection in a spoon, and called it chic. On the balcony, a philanthropist's daughter almost stepped forward, then decided almost was safer. An athlete moved and stopped when his publicist touched his sleeve. Wait, came the whisper. Let it breathe. Time, trained by cameras, obeyed. Cassandra weighed another sweet, lifted it to shoulder height, and sent it spinning with a dancer's wrist. Mara held Cassandra's eyes. Quality holds, she said, voice low, steady, exact. She did not reach for the sugar. She did not adjust the fabric. A staff captain watched her jawline, and nodded once, as if a plan had been shared without words. The quartet slid into a minor passage that tightened the air, then loosened it, then tightened it again. Chandeliers steadied, trembled, and steadied again, as if the ceiling had a heartbeat. At the front, a murmur traveled. She built something which firm. Search it. Brows dropped to screens. Silver light washed complexion. Cassandra felt the tilt and threw faster, turning posture into weather. Pistachio, rose, violet, caramel. Small planets struck silk and stone in a soft drumroll. The floor wore edible confetti. A grandmother in emerald turned away on principle, then turned back because not watching felt like surrender. Every group defends standards. Cassandra announced, smiling widely. Entry is not an insult when exit remains available. The line rose like a slogan built to survive screenshot. A few guests clapped, cautious, testing for backlash. None came, so more joined. A headline formed in a draft folder, and waited for a verb that could sell breakfast. Outside, the night pressed a cool forehead to the glass, and held the pose. Amara's stillness thickened until it seemed visible. She adjusted only breath, stance, and silence. The violinist found her eyes and played cleaner, each note curving around her as if the melody owed rent. A donor traced a wet ring on his glass, and remembered a door that once closed on his mother. He looked up, surprised at familiar anger tapping the same place in his chest. Ever felt judged for who you are? Share your story below. He wrote into a caption field, then hovered over send as if it were a lever. Cassandra watched attention drift toward the woman she meant to diminish and pushed harder, polishing cruelty until it glittered. Standards, she repeated. Softer now, edge bright. She tossed one macaron to the floor, then pressed another into Amara's palm and gently folded her fingers over it, as if sealing a letter. Shell cracked, silence cracked louder, laughter stumbled. The pose pretended intimacy while demanding compliance. Power loves that trick and calls it tradition. A gust slipped through the open door and braided night with perfume and sugar. A waiter steadied a pyramid of glasses, hands sure from heat that never apologized. The foundation director took one step, paused for a board member's praise and stopped. Old games protected new ones. Near the stage, totals rolled upward in brisk digits, unsentimental and almost bored. The chandeliers dimmed a fraction as technicians shifted a cue. For a breath, the room looked older, closer to ordinary, then brightened as if the ceiling in that shadow the frescoes seemed to study the crowd with cooler eyes. Spectatorship carries guilt. Whoever painted those gods knew. Phones hummed, comments collected, algorithms leaned toward a collision of outrage and glamour. Cassandra offered a line about guardianship and taste that would read like duty. Amara answered with no theatrics. The quiet she held was not surrender. It was contour, a boundary the room refused to admit. She opened her palm, examined the cracked shell, and placed it on a passing tray without looking down. The server met her eyes and nodded. A hush moved across the floor, not wide, not final, just enough to prove sound can kneel. Outside, night waited with even breath. Inside, glitter pressed closer, hungry for a climax. The stain on her gown had become a map everyone kept misreading. Cassandra measured that hush and feared it. She reached for drama, snatched 2 sweets, and tossed them fast. The first skipped across marble and shattered against a chair leg. The second tapped Amara's shoulder and landed at her feet like a dare. We keep standards, Cassandra said again, smiling as if offering a blessing. The smile looked thinner. Cameras noticed. A ripple of doubt traveled around tables and made bracelets sing against crystal. A donor in the Navy cleared his throat and said the program should continue. Another proposed a toast that sounded like a plea for normal time. The host lifted a microphone, then lowered it. The quartet waited for a cue that did not arrive. The room balanced on a fine edge. Even the air felt careful. Outside, another cool ribbon slipped through the door. Inside, Cassandra's circle narrowed, tighter and brighter, like fire around paper. Amara stayed where she had chosen to stand. She shifted her heel to avoid a broken almond shell, drew one clean breath and released it. Her gaze neither hardened nor softened. It held. Chandeliers steadied. The music resumed, quieter, as if the instruments wanted to learn composure from her. Phones kept filming. Laughter cooled without quite stopping. The marble kept everything. The sugar, the sentences, the looks, the harm, the patience, and the proof that dignity can stand alone and remain whole. The night kept breathing steadily. The ballroom no longer felt like a hall of music and marble, but like an arena where cruelty became sport. Cassandra stood gleaming in her gold gown, a smile fixed to her lips, while the crowd responded with a loyalty born not of conviction but of fear. Tycoons with watches worth fortunes laughed a little too loudly, as if each chuckle purchased their safety. Socialites leaned close to one another, whispering judgments that sounded like questions yet carried the weight of verdicts. Influencers raised their phones higher, angles carefully framed, filters chosen in real time, all desperate to stay relevant to an audience that fed on humiliation. Nobody moved to intervene. Everyone measured the cost of stepping forward and decided silence was cheaper. The marble floor reflected more than light now. It reflected cowardice. Each smirk glanced off the polished stone like a mirror, angled upward to expose hypocrisy. Chandeliers showered golden beams across jewels, sequins and velvet gilding indifference and radiance. The frescoes above, gods frozen in triumph, seemed to stare down at mortals trading compassion for approval. The air felt heavy with perfume, sugar, and dread. Near the stage, the quartet continued playing, but the notes sounded mechanical, detached, as though the instruments themselves were ashamed. Phones multiplied. The hedge fund magnate's assistant filmed from the corner, uploading clips to a private channel where clients demanded access before the night ended. A lifestyle blogger narrated into her device, voice polished, pretending to analyze fashion while broadcasting humiliation. Billionaires leaned back in their chairs, pretending casual interest while their eyes remained locked on Amara, waiting for her to falter. Each lens turned the moment into spectacle, stripping it of humanity. What should have been empathy became contempt. What should have been outrage became entertainment. Amara remained still, her sapphire gown streaked with crimson tart and pastel crumbs, turned into a canvas painted by cruelty. She did not lift her hands to wipe away sugar or fruit. She stood beneath chandeliers that flickered like a fading empire, her silence louder than any insult. Every breath she drew unsettled the room, because her composure mocked their laughter more effectively than words ever could. A tycoon's wife tugged at her husband's sleeve, whispering that the woman in blue seemed strangely unbroken. He waved her off, unwilling to risk aligning with dignity over dominance. A senator's aide typed rapid notes into a phone, already shaping a narrative that would please donors. Compassion bowed to calculation at every corner of the hall. The cruelty did not require instruction. It spread through the crowd like perfume on fabric. One guest nudged another and tossed a crumb toward Amara's feet, laughing as though it were clever. Another lifted a glass in a mocking toast. Laughter rippled across marble, hollow and sharp. None questioned the morality of joining Cassandra's theater. Each feared that refusing would mark them as outsiders. Privilege demanded allegiance, and cowardice obeyed. The Olympian Hotel's grandeur only magnified the weakness on display, turning cowardice into pageantry. Yet beneath the surface, whispers began to stir. A socialite, careful to keep her voice low, asked whether anyone knew who Amara truly was. An investor, eyes narrowed, muttered that he had seen her name in business reports. Another, scrolling quickly, frowned at search results that contradicted Cassandra's narrative. Doubt was fragile but alive, threading through the crowd like a draft slipping under a closed. Cassandra laughed louder to drown it out, hurling barbs wrapped in charm, insisting that Amara did not belong. But doubt once born cannot be buried so easily. Amara's stillness deepened. It was not weakness. It was a storm gathering in silence. Her eyes held steady, reflecting chandeliers without blinking. She did not plead, argue, or retreat. Her silence made every taunt echo back on the speaker, exposing the emptiness behind their cruelty. The marble floor seemed to amplify her composure, sending it upward until even the painted gods appeared to lean closer. Every guest felt the quiet press against their skin, though most refused to admit it. They told themselves it was nothing, but something inside whispered otherwise. The cowardice of the crowd was not born from ignorance. It was born from fear. Fear of social exile, fear of being laughed at, fear of losing the currency of belonging. To stand beside Amara would mean standing against Cassandra. And Cassandra represented the gate to privilege. None wanted that gate closed. So they laughed, recorded, whispered, and hid behind glass and glamour. In truth, every mocking smile was a confession of weakness. Every phone raised was an admission of complicity. Every silence was louder than Cassandra's. At the edge of the room, a reporter lowered his camera for a moment, eyes flickering between Amara's calm and Cassandra's grin. His instincts whispered that the story was not cruelty, but the woman enduring it. He almost shifted focus, then hesitated, knowing editors demanded spectacle. He filmed Cassandra again. His hesitation, like everyone else's, became part of the record. "Have you seen someone standing alone? Tell us in the comments," whispered the thought that pressed at every observer's conscience. A plea unspoken yet unavoidable. The cool night outside became a silent witness, its air slipping in each time the terrace doors opened. That air carried the smell of rain-soaked stone, sharp and clean, indifferent to privilege or shame. Inside, sugar dust floated through golden beams, soft as snow yet sharp as ebony. Champagne flutes clinked, laughter echoed, and silence thickened around one figure, who refused to break. Amara's gown glowed despite stains, a banner of resilience wrapped in silk. Her presence challenged the crowd more than Cassandra's insults ever could. They laughed at her to avoid admitting they feared her. A banker whispered that she must be someone important, though he could not recall the details. An heiress muttered that Amara's face looked familiar from a magazine. Doubt spread like cracks in porcelain, invisible at first, but impossible to stop. Cassandra sensed it and raised her voice, summoning more laughter, hurling another insult disguised as wit. The crowd obeyed, laughing louder, clapping even, desperate to mask their unease. But their fear betrayed them. Each new laugh sounded thinner, each new cheer more brittle. The marble reflected their cowardice until even they could hear how hollow it was. Amara's eyes swept the crowd once, calm and deliberate. That gaze felt like judgment, silent but absolute. Some guests shifted uncomfortably, and others stared back too long. Phones continued recording, but the footage told two stories now, one of cruelty and one of strength. The viewers would decide which mattered. The chandeliers flickered again, light catching on sugar crystals that sparkled like stars fallen onto marble. The frescoed gods seemed to smirk, as though history itself knew which side would endure. No one stepped forward. Not tycoons, socialites, influencers, senators, athletes, reporters, all chose safety over courage. They traded compassion for access, dignity for acceptance. Their cowardice became the true spectacle, greater even than Cassandra's cruelty. And still Amara stood, still as stone, fierce as silent. She was the quiet storm, and they were the leaves pretending not to tremble. The night outside pressed harder, cool and steady. The city beyond the glass remained unmoved by titles or gowns. But inside, the cowardice of the elite was sealed forever in images, in whispers, in memory. None could escape it, though all would try. Cassandra laughed again, brittle, desperate. The crowd followed, trapped in its own cowardice. And Amara remained, sapphire gown scarred yet radiant, dignity intact, storm gathering. The Olympian Hotel's ballroom glowed with the same golden light, chandeliers casting fire across marble and frescoes. But the energy inside had shifted. The cruelty that once felt like a game now quivered under the weight of something unspoken. Guests continued to laugh, to record, to whisper, but their voices carried an edge of unease. Beneath the perfume, the sugar, the champagne, a question pulsed like a hidden drumbeat. Who exactly was Dr. Amara Kingston? At first it moved like smoke, curling through the crowd in fragments of half-formed sentences. A socialite near the stage leaned toward her companion, eyes narrowing. Her face, haven't you seen it? Somewhere important. The companion scrolled quickly through a glowing screen, frown deepening. A hedge fund magnate whispered into his cuff, instructing an aide to run a search. An heiress studied the sapphire gown stained with tart and macaron crumbs, then muttered, "She doesn't flinch because she doesn't need to. Only people with power act like that." The words clung in the air, sharper than any laugh Cassandra could summon. Cassandra stood radiant in her gold gown, but the sheen no longer blinded so easily. Her laughter came too quickly, brittle at the edges, each note an effort. She threw another insult, but fewer laughed this time, their eyes drawn to phones glowing with results, profiles, interviews, headlines. Amara's name appeared with phrases like global innovation, multi-billion valuation, pioneer in artificial intelligence. The whispers grew louder, threads weaving into fabric. Cassandra adjusted her posture, tilting her chin higher as though height alone could shield her from the truth spreading like cracks through porcelain. Amara remained motionless, her silence pressing down on the hall with the weight of thunder waiting to strike. Her gaze swept the room once, a blade cutting through lies, and settled into stillness again. That silence felt heavier than speeches. Guests shifted in their chairs, the marble echoing every nervous adjustment. The chandeliers flickered, no longer regal but restless, as if even the lights could sense the balance tipping. The frescoed gods above seemed to smirk, their painted eyes watching mortals scramble to rewrite what they thought they knew. Phones illuminated faces in cold silver light. A banker muttered that she controlled investments across continents. A duchess whispered that her foundation had outpaced European rivals. A young influencer gasped aloud when she recognized Amara from a magazine cover she had once used as inspiration for a post. "That's her," she breathed, voice trembling. The ripple of recognition carried further than Cassandra's laughter could reach. People who had mocked now fell silent, calculating the cost of allegiance, rehearsing apologies they might one day need. Cassandra felt her golden gown, once molten and blinding, seemed duller now, less like metal and more like foil. She laughed again, louder, desperate to anchor the crowd in cruelty. But the room no longer belonged to her. Whispers swirled, louder than strings, louder than applause. They spoke of Amara's empire, her reach, her influence, her control over ventures worth more than the marble underfoot. Cassandra tried to reclaim the stage with another mocking gesture, but her hand trembled slightly, betraying nerves beneath polish. Amara's silence continued to grow. It was not absence, but presence, an invisible storm spreading outward. The longer she said nothing, the more powerful she seemed. Every eye that once mocked now watched with a mixture of awe and fear. Her stained sapphire gown no longer looked ruined but transformed, like a banner carrying the marks of battle yet refusing to fall. Sugar crystals glittered on the fabric like stars scattered across midnight. Her stillness reminded them of something ancient, Dignity cannot be destroyed by laughter, only revealed by it. Guests leaned closer, not to mock but to confirm. She owns part of the Langley Fund. One murmured, disbelief coding the words. Another whispered, not part control. A journalist typed furiously, drafting headlines before the night even ended. Each whisper drew oxygen away from Cassandra's performance, feeding a fire she could not see but could feel. The crowd's attention, once hers, now orbited Amara. Fear replaced amusement. Awe replaced cruelty. The cowardice of the crowd remained, but its direction shifted. They no longer feared exclusion from Cassandra's world. They feared exclusion from Amara's. Cassandra's confidence wavered. She smiled too hard, her teeth catching the light but not the room. Her gown seemed heavier now, gold dragging against the marble with every step. Her friends laughed on cue, but the sound was thin, almost pitiful. She reached for another pastry and set it down again, suddenly unsure whether cruelty still served her. Doubt gnawed at the edges of her power. She felt it when a tycoon she expected to applaud simply stared. She saw it when a reporter's camera turned away from her and toward the woman she tried to shame. Amara breathed slowly, each exhale a quiet thunder. Her gaze passed across the room again, steady, merciful. It sliced through facades and left nothing standing. The ballroom felt smaller under that gaze, as though its marble walls could not contain the weight of truth pressing in. Chandeliers flickered once more, casting shadows that seemed to stretch longer than they should. The frescoed gods above leaned closer in imagination, silent judges over privilege unraveling. The marble floor reflected both stains and strength, a double truth the crowd could not ignore. When did someone's strength surprise you? Drop it below. The question lingered not as a spoken phrase but as a pulse in the air, pressing against every conscience. It demanded reflection, demanded memory, demanded honesty. The guests shifted again, some glancing at their phones as if the comment might already be waiting there. The irony was inescapable. The very platforms they used to broadcast cruelty now begged them to recognize resilience. For the first time that evening, silence spread wider than laughter. It settled like a blanket over velvet chairs, over champagne glasses, over jewels worth empires, demanding attention. Cassandra's glow faded further. Her gold gown caught light but no longer commanded it. She laughed once, a brittle sound, and no one followed. She raised her chin, but it wavered. Her confidence cracked, visible now even through the mask of performance. She was no longer the center. She was a shadow beside radiance she had tried to extinguish. Fear bled into her eyes, fear that the empire she had mocked others from might not survive the night. Her smile faltered, and that falter echoed louder than her insults. Amara stood unwavering. Her silence weighed more than words, her gaze more than speeches. She was no longer simply enduring, she was transforming. The crowd sensed it. They felt the storm gathering, sensed that the power they had aligned against now belonged to the woman in the sapphire gown. They whispered her name with reverence, now not mockery. They searched her accomplishments as if memorizing scripture. They shifted allegiances without shame, because cowardice changes direction easily. Cassandra had ruled the room for years, but tonight she was being replaced, not by force, not by spectacle, but by the quiet strength of someone who refused to break. Outside, the cool night air pressed harder, a reminder that truth always arrives eventually, indifferent to privilege. Inside, chandeliers trembled, frescoed gods bore witness, and marble reflected the truth no one could deny. Amara Kingston was not a guest to be mocked, but a force that would redefine the night. The cowardice of the crowd revealed itself again, not in their laughter now, but in their sudden silence, their desperate recalculations, their fear of standing on the wrong side of history. And through it all, Amara remained unshaken, her silence a storm waiting to speak. The hush that had thickened inside the Olympian Hotel now pressed so hard that even the chandeliers seemed to tremble. The laughter, the cruel smirks, the stage jokes, all gone. Only whispers darted like moths under golden light. Amara Kingston, still in her stained sapphire gown, stood motionless. For long minutes she had endured in silence. Now at last, she raised her head and let her voice slip into the marble air. Calm, steady, measured. I've invested $7 billion in your family's fund, she said. The words were simple, factual, and clinical. No shout, no theatrics. They struck harder than any thrown dessert. The marble seemed to echo them, repeating each syllable until it burned into every ear. A phone slipped from someone's hand and shattered against the floor. Gasps rose like a tide, raw and involuntary. The quartet stopped playing, bows frozen midair. For a moment, the opulent ballroom sounded like nothing but shock. Cassandra Langley blinked as though she had misheard. Her smile faltered, her lips parting without words. The gold gown that once seemed to glow like molten metal now looked heavy, dulled by sweat and fear. She forced a laugh, brittle, hoping to pull the crowd back. "Surely a joke," she murmured, but her voice cracked. Guests shifted uneasily, eyes glued to phones now spitting facts into the open. Holdings, board seats, acquisitions. Screens displayed confirmation faster than denial could mask it. Amara did not move except to breathe. Her stillness carried authority sharper than any command. She repeated with the same calm clarity, 7 billion. I did not come here as a guest. I came as your largest stakeholder. The crowd erupted, not in applause but in disbelief. Voices overlapped, whispers cut into gasps. 7 billion. Is that true? She owns the fund? Chairs scraped against marble as people half rose, straining to catch every word. Chandeliers flickered in the reflection of hundreds of glowing screens, light splintering across jewels and glass like truth-shattering illusion. Cassandra's face drained of color. The sheen of her gown, dulled further under the heat of attention, turned against her. She stammered, That's impossible. My family controls." She broke off as a banker spoke loudly from near the stage. "She's telling the truth. I've seen the filings. K Group has the controlling share." The declaration cracked the room open. Gasps surged louder. Phones dropped and a glass shattered at the back. Murmurs swelled into waves of disbelief, panic, and awe. Reporters scribbled furiously. Cameras tilted. Influencers mouthed apologies to their own devices. A senator whispered, "She owns the fund," as though confessing a sin. A duchess covered her mouth with a jeweled hand, eyes wide. Cassandra tried to laugh again, but the sound scraped the air raw. She swayed slightly, as though the marble beneath her feet no longer held. Amara's gaze moved slowly across the hall, a blade cutting through lies. Her eyes met each cluster of power, each face that had mocked her minutes before. None dared laugh now. Her voice, calm and precise, filled the silence again. "Your legacy depends on my decision. Your family's empire survives because I allow it. Tonight I came not to beg entry, but to remind you power is earned, not inherited." The chandeliers dimmed under shifting cues from technicians, but the effect felt prophetic. Light thinned, leaving shadows across painted gods and polished marble, as though the room itself recoiled from Cassandra's fall. Guests leaned into one another, their whispers frantic. "What does this mean for donations? If she pulls out, the fund collapse. Did we just mock our own benefactor?" The irony scorched hotter than the stage lights. Cassandra stumbled back a step, her gown catching under her heel. She caught herself, but dignity slipped beyond reach. Her gold no longer looked royal. It looked desperate, tarnished. "You can't," she began, but Amara's quiet voice cut cleanly across. "I can. I already have. The fund's survival rests in my hand, not yours." The factual tone landed like a verdict. No malice, no triumph, just truth. And truth weighed heavier than insult ever could. A phone clattered to the floors. Someone dropped it in shock. Another guest muttered. She toppled them in a sentence. The air smelled of sugar and panic. Champagne fizz, lost its sparkle. Influencers adjusted captions mid-upload, deleting cruelty and writing off. The marble recorded every detail. A dynasty trembling. A queen revealed. The cool night air slipped in through terrace doors as if summoned, sharp and clean against perfume and sweat. Outside, taxis rolled over rain-slick streets, unaware of history unfolding. Inside, the ballroom boiled with chaos. Tycoons recalculating alliances, socialites rehearsing apologies, reporters chasing headlines. Chandeliers above flickered once more, their crystals flashing like lightning, illuminating Cassandra's ruin. Amara did not smile. She did not glow. She let silence hang again, confident that truth required no decoration. Her sapphire gown, stained with tart and sugar, glowed under fractured light. No longer a canvas of cruelty, but a banner of endurance. She looked regal, not in spite of the stains, but because of them. They testified to survival, to power that endured humiliation, and emerged unshaken. Cassandra's friends stepped back, their loyalty vanishing in real time. A tycoon who once clapped at her jokes, now whispered to an aide, shift meetings to K Group. A socialite erased videos before they reached wider feeds. Influence migrated faster than contagion, abandoning gold for sapphire. Cassandra tried to raise her voice, but no one listened. Her power drained faster than her words could travel. Gasps echoed one last time, as Amara added with calm precision, "Tomorrow, headlines will not read of a gala. They will read of an empire undone." She stepped back into stillness, allowing the words to bloom. The frescoed gods above seemed to nod in painted approval. The marble floor, littered with crumbs and glass, reflected her unbroken stance. The night outside pressed colder against the glass. Indifference absolute. Inside, heat swelled with panic, awe, and the realization that privilege without substance collapses when truth speaks. Cassandra clutched her gown, knuckles white, her empire unraveling in front of those who once cheered her cruelty. Amara turned her gaze once more across the crowd, steady, unsparing, final. Phones no longer recorded mockery, they recorded history, and every guest knew they would leave this ballroom, carrying the weight of what they had witnessed. Not humiliation, but reversal. The quiet storm had spoken, and in one factual revelation, $7 billion had redrawn the map of power. The chandeliers flickered once more, then steadied, as though acknowledging the new order. The marble kept the record, the frescoes bore witness, the chandeliers shivered in judgment, and the night outside whispered cold truth. Cassandra Langley's reign had ended. Amara Kingston had revealed the power no cruelty could diminish. The Olympian Hotel's ballroom had never looked so grand and yet so broken. Crystal chandeliers still spilled golden light across marble floors. Polished to mirrors, frescoed gods still loomed in painted triumph above, and velvet curtains still swayed with drafts of the cool night air. But glamour had thinned to panic. What minutes earlier gleamed as privilege now trembled under truth. The crowd that once laughed with Cassandra now shifted away from her, as if she carried contagion. Phones glowed silver in every hand, screens flashing headlines and figures that spelled out Amara Kingston's reach. The same devices that broadcast humiliation now document Cassandra's ruin. Guests whispered in frantic tones, searching, scrolling, confirming. 7 billion. She controls it all. Langley Legacy Fund exists because of her. How could we not know? Each discovery widened the gulf around Cassandra. Chairs slid back, glasses clinked, and the marble caught reflections of retreat. No one wanted to be caught standing beside her. She stood alone in her gold gown, once molten and commanding, now dull, heavy, and pitiless in the light. Her smile was gone, replaced with eyes darting like a cornered animal. Reporters arrived at the doors, cameras lifted high, microphones raised like weapons hungry for sound. Flashes cut across the hall, blinding in bursts, catching every tremor of Cassandra's hands. Photographers leaned forward, desperate to capture the image of collapse. The hostess turned spectacle. Questions shouted over one another. Dr. Cade, a confirmation on the holdings. Langley, did you know? What happens to the fund now? The orchestra faltered into silence, their bows lowered. For once, music abandoned wealth. Cassandra tried to summon composure. She raised her chin, but the gold gown dragged around her ankles like chains. "This is absurd," she said, voice brittle, words cracking against marble. Nobody believed her. The crowd's attention had shifted permanently. Every whisper, every lens, every eye now faced Amara. Cassandra's empire of inherited power no longer existed. It had shattered in plain sight, and everyone present wanted to be a witness, not an accomplice. Amara did not speak again. She did not need to. She stood calm in her stained sapphire gown, posture unbroken, silence sharper than speeches. Crushed tart streaks down her shoulder looked less like ruin and more like battle scars. Sugar crystals glittered under chandelier beams, like stars scattered across night silk. She was not a victim but a victor, her endurance radiant, her stillness monumental. Every camera frame confirmed it. Cassandra had tried to shame her, and instead crowned her. The ballroom itself seemed to change allegiance. Golden light felt cooler now, chandeliers flickering like conscience. The frescoed gods above appeared to lean lower, their painted faces touched with ironic judgment. Marble reflected chaos, heels clicking in panic, glasses abandoned half full, and spilled champagne spreading in a small pool near Cassandra's table. Its golden bubbles trembled like a fallen crown, glittering but discarded, a perfect emblem of her collapse. Cassandra reached for allies, but hands pulled away. A tycoon who once toasted her shifted his chair toward Amara's circle. A socialite whispered apologies into her phone, rehearsing lines to distance herself. An heiress stepped back as Cassandra leaned near, unwilling to share the camera's gaze. Even her closest friends drifted into the crowd, disguising retreat as coincidence. Isolation encased her, as visible as the gown she could not shed. The murmurs thickened. Guests no longer cared about secrecy. They spoke openly, calculating out loud. Katie Group dwarfs the fund. She could dismantle every Langley venture tomorrow. Align with her or be erased. Phones buzzed with messages. Investors sending urgent commands. Journalists flooding feeds. Cassandra clutched her gown tighter. But fabric cannot hold power once it's gone. She had ruled this ballroom through fear of exclusion. Now fear had turned on her. The cool night outside pressed harder against glass doors. A steady reminder of reality beyond chandeliers. Inside, heat grew from panic. Voices layered with urgency. Reporters pushed forward. Lenses aimed not at wealth but at downfall. Security tried to hold them back, but even their eyes flicked toward Amara, recognizing where authority now lay. Cassandra stumbled backward, her gown catching on marble, her breath short. She raised a hand as if to speak, but words failed. Silence consumed her, louder than any denial. Amara remained still, sapphire and scarlet, under fractured light, dignity embodied. The crowd looked at her with awe and fear, ashamed they had mocked, desperate now to stand aligned with her. A senator whispered about policy, a banker bowed his head, an athlete adjusted his tie nervously. None approached directly. They circled like planets around a new sun, cautious, reverent. Cassandra, once the star, had become shadow. Flashes fired faster. Headlines were already forming. Legacy falls at Olympian Gala. 7 billion shifts the room. Langley dynasty crumbles. Words carved themselves into history, while Cassandra stood powerless to erase them. She touched her gold gown as if fabric could restore radiance. But the sheen had dulled, every crease magnified under the glare of cameras. Her empire was not slipping. It had already collapsed. The marble recorded everything. The widening gap between Cassandra and her crowd, the shift in posture from arrogance to desperation, the trembling hands she tried to hide. Guests documented her ruin with the same eagerness they once documented her reign. Cowardice had simply changed sides. No one offered her a chair. No one defended her name. No one stopped the tide. Justice, inevitable and unkind, had arrived wrapped in silence and truth. A woman in emerald whispered. She stood alone, nodding toward Amara. Another replied softly, "That's why she owns the." Their voices carried, reaching more ears, spreading like a hymn. Amara's stillness became scripture. Cassandra's collapse its caution. When did someone's strength surprise you? Drop it below, the question hovered, implied in every recording, every caption draft. It turned spectacle into testimony, demanding the world outside these walls reflect as well. Cassandra's breath came uneven now. She tried to smile for a camera, but it twisted into a grimace. Her hands shook as she adjusted jewelry that had suddenly become heavy against her skin. She was no longer the gatekeeper of privilege. She was its warning. The gold gown dragged behind her like ash. Amara remained. Her silence ruled. Her sapphire gown shimmered despite stains, every mark a testament to survival. Where Cassandra's champagne crowned the floor, Amara's presence crowned endurance. The cool night air slipped in again through open doors, brushing across the crowd with indifference. Outside, the city carried on, taxis hissing, streetlights glowing, rain drying on stone. Inside, history was rewritten under crystal light. The Olympian Hotel had hosted dynasties, galas, and coronations of wealth. Tonight it hosted a collapse, privilege shattered, cowardice exposed, justice inevitable. Cassandra Langley stood isolated in gold, powerless. Dr. Amara Kingston stood regal in sapphire, unbroken. The crowd, once complicit, now turned witness, and the marble floor beneath gods and chandeliers bore a silent record of an empire undone. The chandeliers above the Olympian Hotel still glowed, but their light no longer crowned privilege. It cast judgment instead, spilling across marble polished to mirrors, across frescoes where gods looked down as silent witnesses. The air inside held the residue of sugar, champagne, and fear, while the cool night outside pressed against the tall glass doors like truth demanding entry. Guests stood hushed, their voices clipped, their eyes restless. Phones had captured humiliation, revelation, and collapse. Now they turned to capture the aftermath. At the center, in a sapphire gown scarred by tart and macaron crumbs, stood Dr. Amara Kingston. She did not raise her hands for silence. She didn't need to. Her stillness commanded attention as surely as wealth commands notice. The stains across her gown glittered under fractured light, not as ruin but as symbols of battle endured. Every crimson streak, every sugar fleck, became proof of resilience. She turned once, her gaze sweeping across the marble hall, and the crowd parted in instinctive deference. Those who had mocked minutes before now bowed inward, afraid to meet her eyes yet desperate to be seen by her. Silence reigned, taut as a drawn bow. Her voice broke it, calm, steady, deliberate. Power is earned, not inherited. The words echoed, amplified by marble and glass, louder than the orchestra ever had. They sliced through the remnants of laughter, through cowardice, through the false radiance of inherited privilege. They cut straight to the bone of the night's spectacle. For a moment, nobody breathed. Then a collective murmur surged, soft gasps, hushed confessions, frantic agreements. She's right. We watched it happen. It's over. Reporters scribbled furiously, their headlines already shaping history. Influencers whispered to their devices, framing captions that replaced cruelty with awe. Bankers and tycoons exchanged sharp glances, recalculating futures. Yet no one dared interrupt. Amara had seized the moment entirely. Every eye fixed on her sapphire gown, torn and stained yet regal, gleaming under chandelier light like armor forged from truth. She stood not as a victim, but as a victor, her presence undeniable. Cassandra, trapped in her dulled gold gown, finally broke. She staggered back, knees giving way, collapsing onto a chair that scraped loudly against marble. The sound rang like defeat. She tried to rise, but no hand reached out. Her friends had already stepped aside, unwilling to share her room. The empire she once represented had abandoned her in the very room she thought she ruled. Cameras tilted to catch the image, the golden heiress crumbling, the sapphire survivor towering. Amara did not gloat. She did not smile at Cassandra's collapse. Instead, she looked beyond her toward the crowd itself. Her voice carried again, lower but sharper. You chose silence when cruelty demanded courage. You chose laughter when dignity stood before you. Tonight you learned privilege without substance crumbles the moment truth enters the room. Her words struck harder than an accusation, because they were undeniable. Guests shifted, ashamed. Some lowered their eyes. Others stared at phones as though hiding inside the glow. Yet her tone lifted, triumphant, generous even. Resilience, she said, her gaze sweeping them once more, cannot be taken. It is proven. It is earned. The chandeliers flickered as if bowing. Marble reflected her words back, magnifying them into permanence. The frescoed gods seemed to nod in painted silence. Amara's stillness had become scripture, and her voice its verse. What moment made you feel unstoppable? Share to inspire the unspoken invitation, pressed into every guest, into every camera, into every audience beyond those walls. It was not a plea but a command, a call to remember dignity, to spread it, to carry it further. The crowd parted as she stepped forward. Her sapphire gown flowed like a tide across marble, each stained fold shining like proof of survival. Guests leaned back, creating a clear path to the tall glass doors. Phones followed her movement, not Cassandra's collapse. Every step echoed, slow, deliberate, final. Perfume and sugar hung in the air, but the cool night pushed closer, waiting to receive her. The orchestra lowered its instruments, watching in reverence. Even security shifted aside, recognizing authority no badge could match. Cassandra remained hunched, her gold gown dull as old foil, head bowed under the weight of abandonment. She reached for a friend, but none came. Her empire of fear and inheritance dissolved entirely. The crowd did not protect her. They did not even look. All eyes followed Amara. Cassandra's collapse was not a tragedy. It was inevitable. Justice wore a sapphire that night, not gold. Flashes erupted as Amara reached the door. Reporters shouted questions, but she answered with silence, gaze steady, chin high. That silence told more than words could. It told of power revealed, of endurance crowned, of cruelty defeated without retaliation. Her presence, regal even in stains, testified that dignity is not erased by attack, but illuminated by it. She paused at the threshold, the cool night air brushing her face, carrying scents of rain-soaked stone and city lights. She breathed it in like victory. The crowd exhaled collectively, a sound that carried awe, fear, and respect. Guests whispered apologies to themselves, promising allegiance they had denied earlier. Tycoons whispered strategies. Senators rehearsed statements. Influencers crafted stories. But none of it mattered. Amara had already left her mark deeper than headlines. She had shown them a truth that could not be deleted. Power does not rest in inheritance, but in resilience. Her exit became legend before she even stepped outside. Marble mirrored her gown, chandeliers shimmered as if reluctant to let her go, and frescoed gods bore witness from painted heights. The crowd that had once mocked now followed her with reverence, every phone desperate to capture the final image. The sapphire queen leaving the ballroom that had once tried to destroy her. Cassandra's sobs muffled behind them went unnoticed. The heiress sat abandoned in gold, a relic of privilege collapsed. Champagne pooled on the marble near her feet, bubbles trembling like a crown dropped from a careless hand. She had once ruled this room. Now she was nothing more than its warning. Amara pushed the doors open. Her cool night air swept in, cleansing perfume and sugar with sharp clarity. Street lamps glowed across wet pavement. Taxis hissed by, and cameras flashed against glass. Reporters surged forward, microphones raised. She did not break stride. She stepped into the night as if claiming it, sapphire gown glowing under city lights like a beacon. The Olympian Hotel's grandeur faded behind her. The chandeliers, the frescoes, the marble, all remained, but their meaning had changed. The hall that celebrated privilege now stood as a tomb of its collapse. Guests who stayed inside would remember their cowardice. Those who followed would remember her command. The world outside would soon remember the night. A dynasty fell and a woman in sapphire rose. Her final words still echoed. Power is earned, not inherited, and they would not fade. They would live in headlines, in whispers, in posts, in memory. They would outlast chandeliers, frescoes, and marble. They would remind generations that endurance builds empires. No cruelty can top. As the doors closed behind her, the ballroom sank into dim silence, its opulence now backdrop to ruin. Cassandra remained collapsed, forgotten. Guests whispered in low tones, already reshaping alliances. But Amara walked into the night untouched, her dignity radiant, her resilience unbreakable. She was no longer a guest of the gala. She was its lesson, its truth, its legacy. The doors of the Olympian Hotel swung wide, and the cool night air rushed in like a tide reclaiming the shore. Dr. Amara Kingston stepped out, her sapphire gown catching the glow of street lamps. Its stains no longer marks of cruelty, but symbols of survival. Photographers swarmed, their cameras flashing in bursts that lit the wet pavement like lightning striking marble. Reporters shouted questions, voices blending into chaos. Yet Amara did not break stride. Her poise remained unshaken, every movement a testament to dignity. Behind her, the ballroom that had once dripped with privilege now lay hollow. Chandeliers still burned above frescoed gods. Marble still shone under their light, but the grandeur felt like a tomb. Champagne puddled near abandoned tables, its bubbles trembling like a fallen crown. Cassandra Langley sat hunched in her gold gown, isolated. Her empire of inheritance collapsed in front of the very people who once worshipped her. The crowd no longer looked at her. They whispered only about Amara, the woman they had underestimated, the woman who had turned humiliation into triumph. Headlines spread before the night even ended. Notifications lit phones in every hand. Tech mogul topples Langley empire. 7 billion turns the gala upside down. Resilience redefines power at Olympian Hotel. The world beyond those marble walls had already claimed the story, shaping it into legend. Clips flooded networks, comments surged, and the spectacle of cruelty had been replaced by the revelation of endurance. Amara had not only survived the attack, she had rewritten its meaning, transforming shame into a mirror that exposed privilege as fragile and empty. Outside, the city embraced her. Rain-slick streets reflected her gown, glowing like a beacon against the darkness. Taxis slowed, passengers craning their necks to glimpse the woman who had silenced an empire with a sentence. Strangers stopped, their faces lit by the flashes of cameras murmuring her name. The cool night carried the sound of it down avenues and alleys. Amara the unbreakable, the storm that had spoken. She paused at the curb, the press still shouting questions, and lifted her chin toward the night sky. She did not answer the noise. She did not need to. Her silence said everything. It told of strength earned, of dignity preserved, of a lesson carved into history. The stains on her gown sparkled under the lights. No longer blemishes but constellations, proof that resilience does not hide. It shines brighter after trial. The lesson was undeniable. Power built on inheritance collapses when tested, but power earned through resilience endures. Amara had shown it with stillness, with patience, with truth. She had not shouted down cruelty. She had outlasted it. She had not begged for belonging. She had redefined it. The crowd inside the hotel would spend years retelling the moment, ashamed of their laughter, awed by her composure. The frescoed gods would forever look down on that marble floor as witnesses to privilege undone and dignity revealed. The cameras caught her final glance at the hotel before she entered her car. It was not anger, not revenge, only calm acknowledgement that the night had ended, as it was meant to. The Olympian Hotel had hosted her humiliation, and it had hosted her victory. Its grandeur would never escape the memory of the night. Its power shifted from gold to sapphire. And so the story closed, not with despair but with triumph. Amara walked into the night unbroken, her sapphire gown glowing like a beacon, her silence louder than every cruel laugh that had filled the ballroom. She left behind a warning for the arrogant and a promise for the resilient. No attack, no mockery, no privilege can extinguish the strength of someone who refuses to bow. If this story shook you, share it, subscribe, and hit the bell for more epic tales of unbreakable spirits. Carry this lesson forward, because resilience is the power that outlives empires.